Arena co-host of the Interview podcast at the New York Times and CNN contributor Lulu Garcia-Navarro, editor of The Dispatch, and CNN political commentator Jonah Goldberg, CNN political commentator and former communications director to Vice President Kamala Harris, Jamal Simmons, and former Republican Congressman and Speaker pro temp Patrick McHenry. Great to have you all here with us. Jonah, let's kick it off with you. I mean, what do you make of the fact that the president is sort of touting this document that says he's more powerful than some of the history's most brutal dictators like Hitler and Stalin?
Yeah, there are only two possibilities. Either he believes it or he's just saying it, and I'm not sure which one is better. I don't think, I think it's, I want to be really clear, I think it's just really stupid, right? It's a dumb thing to get obsessed about on his part. It reflects his utter lack of ability to draw distinctions between good and bad. He only measures things on the metric and the rubric of power. And it's his way, I think, of sort of bragging about, himself and all that. The relevant part of it is he is saying this in the context of this deal with Iran, which he says the Iran war proved he has unlimited power, when in fact the Iranians forced him to a negotiating table because he couldn't get the Strait of Hormuz open. The fact that he doesn't recognize the actual limits on his power, as evidenced by the deal that he was forced to get into, is a sign of delusion that I think is going to create more problems in foreign policy and maybe domestic policy going forward, because if he doesn't actually see the limits on his power, then he's going to make the same mistakes again. Yeah.
How do you see it, Patrick?
Well, let's understand how President Trump sees it. In the context of coming off this, whatever we're going to call this with Iran right now, the memorandum of understanding, whatever the performance of that is, his psyche is all geared to that. So we have this question about inflation. Well, his mind was on the previous set of questions in the Oval Office, and he says, I love the inflation, meaning he's talking to the Iranians saying, I'm not scared about anything. What he's saying to the world here is, no, of course I don't have any limitations. We've got the best military. We killed the top regime, set of the regime. I don't feel any limitation on what I can do. That's his psyche on this. Now, Jonah has all the appropriate caveats, which is that's actually not the takeaway. The takeaway is the Strait of Hormuz what we should have learned is out of the Ukraine battlefield, which is with cheap drones, the world is a different place. And now we had the Strait of Hormuz shut down by cheap drones and ski boats. You can call them different things, but if you look at them, they're effectively Boston whalers. These things are cheap, right? And you had global trade shut down because of these very cheap things. This is a lesson for the globe's military leadership, and it should be instructive to all leaders of nations.
I agree with all of that, with the one proviso that I agree with you, he's trying to signal, I agree with you, he's trying to signal on inflation, and we talked about that way. But at the same time, he's been carrying around this caddy's historical analysis because he wants it to be true when he's not signaling to the Iranians. There is something about him that is just obsessed with this stuff.
Gary Player's caddy? That's what you're saying? I mean, this seems...
Socrates, Aristotle, Gary Player's caddy.
Right? I mean, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. But I wonder what you think about this, Lulu, because on one hand, as you point out, he's trying to say, I love inflation, trying to send this message perhaps to the Iranians that he could do anything. But then he also admitted just this week that he was really concerned about causing a Great Depression, that he noticed the stock market would go up when there was talk about a deal and it would go down when there were headlines that a deal was falling through. I mean, he's acutely aware of the dynamics and the limits in that regard, at least.
Well, let's actually frame this conversation in the right way. We're trying to understand how delusional is Donald Trump. Does he believe the caddy's kind of historical quote unquote document, and or is he trying to convince people that this is the truth? And this has always been the question, like, does he believe his own press, or the kind of reality that he has created around himself, where everyone is constantly kowtowing to him, everyone is constantly serving his ego? Or does he actually realize that there are things that he has to do? And I think this second term, that has been the real tension, because he has entered the second administration with this feeling of having absolute power. And what we've seen over time, whether it be with immigration, whether it be with foreign policy, that those limits have actually manifested themselves. And so I don't know the answer to that. I have given up a long time ago trying to understand Trump's psyche, but I do think it's relevant for all of us because we live in the world that Trump creates. And so at the end of the day, it is important how he sees things and how he navigates them. With this in particular, I think he's just messaging. I think he's messaging to everybody. He's never going to admit that he is not numero uno and he can do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, first of all, it seems like everybody needs a flock to fly with, right? And so if that's the flock that he chooses, then what are we going to say about it? But it is historically inaccurate and it is strategically dumb to take the position that he's taking. First of all, the founders set up a system where we do have checks and balances and the president should not have all the power. And so he may be able to find this out in November when Democrats take over at least one house of Congress that he doesn't have as much power as he thinks. On the other hand, since World War II, I'm somebody who believes in American competitiveness. I believe in having a strong country that's able to get its way in the world. Since World War II, we've done that in part by having alliances that have helped give us power when we go in to take on problems. This president has learned what happens when you don't have alliances that help you go in and take on big problems. And that's why we're in the situation we're in Iran.
But has he learned? And I would say he has not learned. Look just what happened with Giorgia Meloni.
Well, the rest of us have certainly learned.
No, but look just what happened with Giorgia Meloni, the leader of Italy, a very close ally of President Trump, and they've just had a huge diplomatic spat. Why? Because Trump, wanted to be the big macho man and say, oh, she was begging for a picture with me. It's asinine. It is ridiculous and stupid to talk about, first of all, another leader that way, a female leader that way. The language is so offensive and demeaning. Why are you going to blow up that relationship over a picture?
But for that, though, the G7 was designed around President Trump. That was the whole meeting was about whether or not they can get him on sides with Ukraine, on sides with trade,
sure,
on side with China, on side with a resolution in the Middle East, and importantly for Europe, their energy infrastructure. It was all designed around that, and that was a huge footfall at the end to do that with Meloni.
Relationships only work if both people want to be in the relationship. I'm not convinced that Donald Trump wants to be in this relationship with these allies.
All right, we'll leave it there. Coming up on the